Hello and welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi.
What's going on, guys?
And today we're going to get into the quarterback preview. So we're going to do a little bit different format. Instead of going like start, sit, we're going to talk about kind of a little player tier at the end of QB1 and a player tier in the middle to end of QB2. Talk about how we'd rank those guys and who would be starting over which quarterbacks. So hopefully this format will help you guys make your roster decisions a little bit better instead of talking about guys like Burrow or Allen or Daniels. With the QB1s, we're going to go through a tier of Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff, and Sam Darnold. And we're going to start with Kirk Cousins going up against the New Orleans Saints without Marshawn Lattimore now. So what do you got for us on Cousins here? Or what do you think?
Yeah.
What do you think about Cousins now in this matchup?
I mean, back-to-back weeks where I like Cousins, right? Like last week, he was my start of the week. He played great. And, it was really great to see Kirk Cousins play well against a team that was not the Buccaneers. Outside of week 2 against Philly, Kirk hadn't thrown more than one touchdown against any opponent besides the Buccaneers. He had 3 touchdowns in this game against the Cowboys. London obviously caught that first touchdown. Beautiful play. Missed the rest of the game with an injury. Hopefully he'll be back this week or next. But I think just the fact that he was able to move the ball so effectively without his top target and the fact that Kyle Pitts kind of went back to being a ghost in this game was very encouraging. And like you mentioned with the Saints, Lattimore's gone and they're just an absolute dumpster fire right now. They lied to us the first 2 weeks of the season. Yeah, it's everything that can go wrong will go wrong with the Saints. It's like Carr sent his star receiver to the hospital and then got his coach fired the next day. It's just brutal over there right now.
Yeah, so I think they're going to be in disarray. I do like Cousins, but in this game, right, like he obviously had a great game from a real life perspective. They won against Dallas, but he only attempted 24 passes. Like, where did that come from? 19 for 24, 222 and 3. Like, it would have been nice to see him get a little bit of additional volume. He had 29 passes last week as well against Tampa Bay. So it's like his volume isn't really there. And against the Saints, where like Bijan should be able to run effectively, maybe Algier gets some run too. And if he only attempts 25 passes, this is going the Goff route where he can be very good, but like the bottom can fall out quick if you have low volume like that. So I do think he'll be good. I don't think London's going to play this week. He has a hip pointer. I think maybe he misses only 1 week, but I would guess that he's going to be out this week against the Saints. So it's going to have to be Mooney and Pitts, which I think is more than enough to kind of carry with Bijan out of the backfield getting a lot of work. But I do still like Cousins a lot, obviously, right? If you have him, you're likely starting him. He will be inside the top 10 ranked this week. And so, and if you're looking in your 1 QB leagues, if you're still rolling with CJ Stroud and Kirk Cousins is out there in your 1 QB leagues, like you should make that switch now. Like I do really like Cousins this week and just in general for the rest of the year, I think. I wouldn't cut Stroud because Nico's expected to be back or Nico could be back next week type of thing. But, if you can add Cousins to your team and play him this week, especially if you really need a win, I think that's something you should be looking at doing.
What do you make of Pitts not doing anything in this game with London out most of the game?
I call it inevitable. Right. I mean, he wasn't just gonna keep being good forever, right? I mean, he's Kyle Pitts. So I don't know. I think overall Pitts is gonna be fine, and the fact that Cousins did it without him, I think should just show that he doesn't need Kyle Pitts to be productive. And so, in this game against the Saints, without London, they're going to probably try and game plan without London. So that should help Pitts in terms of targets. The other thing too, is when you only throw 24 passes, like no matter what you do, you're pretty much going to be disappointing unless you're Darnell Mooney. It's like, it's just one of those things where I think he just kind of wasn't needed and they got up and they ran the ball and they didn't really throw that much. Except for Mooney down the field, and that was kind of the whole deal. So that's kind of where I'm at with Kyle Pitts, and I am really pretty concerned in this game because I think they're going to be winning. So, how much Kyle Pitts gets early in the game, I think is going to kind of foreshadow or, show what he's going to do in the game because I wouldn't guess that he's going to get a ton of targets in the second. Moving over to our next guy that we're going to talk about here is Sam Darnold, QB for the Vikings. We just saw him have an awful first half against Indy on Monday night, but then he turns around in the second half and his final line ends up being 290 and 3. So it was like, oh my gosh, what? Like he just decided to go off in the second half, which against Indy, I think should be expected. And you don't get a much better matchup against Jacksonville, which is who he has this week, right? So he's got that super easy schedule here now. And I think against Jacksonville, you can expect more of the same. I would rank Kirk just a little bit ahead of Darnold, but this game too, Jacksonville maybe can score a little bit with the Vikings. And if they do, I think Darnold could be in for a big game. I think we see more Hawkinson in this game, which could help. Jordan Addison looked much better against Indianapolis. So, maybe he gets game planned more against Jacksonville. And obviously, Jefferson's going to get his. So I like Darnold a lot this week. Again, another guy I would for sure be playing over a Stroud if you had him, or if you're looking for a streamer, he's still out there in your leagues. This is somebody I think is a great scoop and play this week.
One of the things that's really impressed me with Darnold this season, like obviously he had that one bad game against the Jets, but obviously throughout his career, it's never been a question of his physical talents. Like we know he's got the arm, he can run, he's athletic, things like that. But it's always been like the lowest of lows and inconsistency, mental errors, things like that. But other than that one bad week and week one, scoring only 14.5 fantasy points, everything else has been 16 plus. So he's been like kind of a model of consistency this year, which is really great to see. And I'm, really happy for him because I'm obviously a huge Sam Darnold homer, but I'm curious, what do you think is next for Darnold? Like, obviously he's on a 1-year deal. Obviously they brought in McCarthy. Like, does he sign a short-term deal with Minnesota? Does he go somewhere else as the starter? Like, what's next?
Looking forward, I'm not even sure, man. I don't know that there's going to be a huge market for Darnold. I saw after they started 5-0 that it was like, oh, he's trending towards making 45 to 50 million a year.
Right?
It's
is it Carolina's going to give it
not.
to him? Like, what I mean? Like, you start playing out these situations, you're like I don't know.
No, I feel like once you're a backup in the league, like once you go through the arc of being a backup, you're not gonna make that kind of money. You're just not, in my opinion, right? Like we have guys that are starting like Russ and Fields. They were backups or left for dead, right? And they're not getting deals. Like I just don't know that. Like Winston too, he didn't really sign to be the starter, but like he also kind of was high level and went through being a backup. I just don't know that there's a big example of somebody that turned into a backup that then went all the way up to like 40 or 50 million a year. Like for Darnold, I think maybe he re-signs with Minnesota, but again, if they're looking to turn it over to JJ McCarthy, like maybe it's another 1-year deal type of thing, right? And then like the Panthers, they're going to go draft a quarterback. So
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, and he's not gonna go back to Carolina. That would just be ridiculous. Yeah, like a 1 year, maybe like a $15 million, because McCarthy, he's so young too. And as much as I kind of wasn't high on him coming out of Michigan, like I think seeing what Darnold's done in this system, like I have faith that McCarthy will learn to handle that. But if they can get him on a team friendly 1-year deal, I think that would be wise for all parties involved.
Yeah, and like another guy that was kind of left or was a backup, right? Came in, had a great year, and then signed a new deal, Geno Smith, right? Like he signed a 3-year, $105 million deal. That's not anywhere close to 45 million a year, right? Like that's very good money for a starter, but like Darnold's not getting that huge contract. So even if Minnesota wanted to commit to him, but they just drafted used a top 10 pick on a quarterback, I think that's what complicates the situation. If they hadn't drafted McCarthy, maybe this would be something where he could get a contract similar to Geno, but I don't know. It's just not the case. I don't know exactly where he's going to go, and I think it's just difficult to try and predict at this point what he's going to get and who's even going to be in the market for a quarterback, because I think that will develop after the draft. Maybe the Raiders again miss on quarterback, and he can go to the Raiders because they really need a quarterback. Darnold is still only 27, so maybe they give him $30 million a year there. But 35 I think is more the cap on what Darnold could get if a team really does fall in love with him. The next guy we're going to talk about here on this first group, and this might be somebody that you're wondering why he made it up into this group, but it's Jared Goff, and he goes up against Houston this week, and I think that's why we like him. I think Houston's defense is gettable, and obviously Goff has been awesome on a per-pass attempt basis this year, but he is coming off a tough game against Green Bay, but I don't think that was his fault. I think that was a big part of playing outdoors in the weather, and I think it was a pretty easy call to say bench him last week. I mean, I had him or Caleb Williams as my options, and like that obviously wasn't great last week, but I did still, even in that situation, decide to bench Goff just because I knew it was going to be wet. I knew it was going to be tough, and they have one of the best running games in the league, so it was like they're just going to run. And we thought maybe in the weather it's going to be like, oh, maybe we'll see kind of crack in the armor for Goff in terms of completion percentage, and then he goes out and he starts 12 for 12. So it was like, okay, like he's still not throwing any incompletions. He's still just rolling. So he ended up 18 for 22. Again, just a stellar completion percentage. And this week against Houston, especially if they get Nico Collins back, I think they might have to score a little bit more here, and they might have to throw a little bit more too against this Houston front. So I do hope, that we see maybe for the first time since week 2, he can crack 25 pass attempts. And if he does that, if he's up at 27 to 30 pass attempts, I think we could see, 225 yards and 3 touchdowns again in this game.
Yeah, the football gods saw the schedule where he has 14 games in a dome, and they're like, okay, you're going to get a tough one outdoors in Green Bay and pouring rain. So there was, nothing against, that was just a crappy situation. And he played very well. And he hasn't thrown a pick since like week 3, which is just awesome too. So, and it was funny because you were, obviously you had Goff as a QB2 sit last week, and then you went with Caleb, and they scored like identical fantasy points.
Yeah, they both had within 9 and change. Yeah.
It was like within 0.5. And I know you were stressing about that too. So it didn't really end up making a big difference. But yeah, I was going to add too with Nico hopefully coming back, that hopefully this turns into more of a shootout, because it definitely has the potential to be.
Yeah, definitely. So, I don't know. I just hope Goff throws a little bit more, and he's still QB 15 on the year. So, if he increases his volume during any game, right, you're going to just be glad you started him during that game. And I'm planning to start him this week. So, hopefully he does well against Houston. Looking down a little bit further at some of the QB2s here. So, depending where you look too, some of these guys that we're going to talk about here might be ranked ahead of Goff. Just because of the low volume, it's kind of hard to rely on Goff. But the first guy we're going to talk about here is Tua Tagovailoa. He goes up against the Rams, coming off a solid performance against Buffalo, which doesn't happen to him that much. He usually struggles against Buffalo. He only had 5 points earlier in the year, but he's coming off a 17.5-point game against Buffalo, going up against the Rams, who are very beatable. They just got torched through the air this week. And so I think Tua, Tyreek, Waddle, Achane, they all might get right in this game against this gettable defense.
We haven't really seen like a vintage Tyreek Hill play with Tua since he's been back. I mean, I know he went 4 for 80 last week, but like just one of those like 70-yard bombs that he takes to the house.
Yeah.
And last week with, like you mentioned, with Geno and Jason and Lockett, like Jason looked like he did in that Ohio State Rose Bowl when Olave and Garrett Wilson were out, and he went for like 350 yards. He was just on fire. It was really fun to watch. It was tough because I faced him in 2 leagues, which was really annoying. But and no offense to like Lockett and Jason, but they don't have that gear that Waddle and Tyreek have. And I know Waddle's been like a major disappointment. And I was texting you during that game. I was like, I think he's like a drop at this point, but like this is the week where he should and can blow up against that secondary. So I'm really excited for Tua this week. I think, this should be a pretty good game.
Playing what Waddle was doing on that last play of the game. Like, why did he get that lateral from Achane and then just turn his back to the end zone and run directly back towards his goal line 20 yards? Like, what the heck was that, dude? Did you think you were going to get around that defender that had an angle on you going that way? Like, where were you going? Dude, that was so annoying. Every Tua over better is pissed about that play because he was over and he got negative 24 yards and ended up under. So
those last plays are just killer for this
take them out of fantasy, dude. Take the kneels out. Take the freaking laterals at the end of the game. Take that all out of the fantasy stats, dude. We don't want to deal with that.
I bet you he felt like he was back in high school where a punt went over his head. He ran back to the other team's end zone, and because he's a far superior athlete, probably ended up housing it. And he's like, "Oh shit, I'm going to try this in the NFL."
Yeah. He's like, dude, I can traverse field on a guy that's already 5 yards behind me. Let me try this. And it's just like, he got thrown to the turf.
He ended up with like minus 4 yards on the week or
He did. Yeah, he did. He
Yeah.
only had 20 yards at that point. He got negative 24 on that play, and he had like 2 or 3 for negative 4 in the touchdown. It was just so frustrating. But that sort of play is not going to happen in this game. I would venture to guess. So hopefully Waddle can kind of get it going in this game. But yeah, I don't have a lot of faith in Waddle. If you can trade him, go ahead and do that if possible. If somebody's still buying that he could be anything down the stretch.
Trade him after this week. Hopefully he goes off and then sell on the big game in the name value.
Yeah, maybe. But like again, we talk about this a lot. If he doesn't go off, then it's just further and further down until
but his value's like nothing. His value's like nothing right now. So I would take my chances like in that.
Would you even give up Cedric Tillman for him right now?
No.
So it's like, how much lower are you going to go? Like Tillman was just added off the wire. I don't know. It's just like
Tillman's the number one receiver the last 3 weeks, right?
Oh my God, dude. Yeah. Over the last 3 weeks, he's number one. Yeah, okay. Well, it's a lot of touchdowns. He does have 2 touchdowns inside the 2-minute warning in both of the last 2 games. So it's like
and guess what? They're going to be
saving his value.
It's going to be garbage time like the rest of the season though too. This isn't gonna change, like
yeah, I guess they have a tough schedule, and I hear you. Garbage time plus Winston equals fantasy gold. So
all of us over 30 remember Blake Bortles, right? Like
yeah. What about Amari Cooper? If you had Amari Cooper, would you trade him to get Waddle?
No, I would keep Cooper.
So like, I mean, I don't know. What are you getting for Waddle? I don't know. You have to add him on as like a throw-in.
No,
that's basically what he is now.
That's the point I'm making. Is if you have Waddle, hold him this week. If he sucks against the Rams secondary, he has no value.
You just drop him.
You can cut him. Yeah, dude, he's wide receiver. 65 on the year. I don't know what else to say. I'd rather. I don't know. I know that touchdown helped.
Bad.
I know that.
Yeah, I mean, it had to have helped, even though he had negative yards.
He was
turning into a Waddle hit session right here.
He was wide receiver 66 heading into the week, and so I was giving him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, and he had 6 points and went down to wide receiver 68. So,
sorry, Jalen.
So bad. All right, let's get back on track with the quarterbacks here now. So we're going to move over to Aaron Rodgers, our second quarterback, and kind of the QB2 discussion here. And he goes up against Arizona coming off back-to-back pretty good games, right? He had 17 and 20. He threw multiple touchdowns in both games. Devontae Adams finally got going against Houston. Very excited about that. Garrett Wilson had the catch of the year, probably the catch of the NFL since Odell Beckham's, because that play was incredible. But going up against Arizona, they just held the Bears down, but I don't think they're going to have that much success against the Jets. Adams feels like he's all the way read in. Wilson is probably a top 5 wide receiver. We were just talking about that before the show. Top 5 wide receiver for the rest of the season here, because they have such a good schedule. But Rodgers is somebody too that has 2 weeks of value. If you are in a 1 quarterback league, obviously if you have him in Superflex, you're going to be playing him against Arizona and Indy. But in that QB2 discussion, he is definitely trending up. Somebody that you definitely want to be playing in your Superflex leagues, and somebody in a 1 quarterback league where he's starting to get back into the discussion.
Yeah, and with Rodgers, it's like he loves, and I've been saying this since the offseason, like he loves to throw the ball when he's like inside the 10-yard line. And not every quarterback does it at the rate that he does. And with his accuracy and with the route runners that he has, and Wilson and Devontae, like that's just, an extra bonus that you get. And that's why you see these like 3 touchdown games, even when he doesn't have high yardage totals. So I really like Rodgers. Like, he seemed extremely confident when he was on that, post-game panel. He was talking about how he walked Herbert through like the whole schedule rest of the season. He thinks so many of these games are winnable. He's got that like weird elixir that he's drinking that's like the fountain of youth. Like he's all in. And for like it could have gone sideways if they lost that week. So I'm excited about Rodgers.
Yeah, and I mean for how bad the Jets are, like Rodgers has done this type of thing before, right? I mean, everybody, I feel like that's a NFL fan from a while ago, like everybody remembers the RELAX, right? They were like 2-5 or 2-4 at that point. They or even further along in the season, they ripped off 6 or 7 straight wins and won the division. Like he's not going to win the division with the Bills in it, but they are not out of the playoff race at all. I mean, they're looking up at the Steelers. They're looking up at the Broncos. I guarantee they think that they can catch those teams. AFC is still pretty wide open, I think, for those playoff spots. So I definitely think Rodgers is going to get it going here. Another side note just on his stats, right? He has 7 straight games of over 200 yards, and 4 of his last 5 games he's thrown multiple touchdown passes. He had kind of an uncharacteristic spell of interceptions from week 5 to week 7. He threw 6 picks in 3 weeks. That's something that we never see. And he only has one pick outside of those weeks. So I think he's going to clean up the negative plays too. That should help sustain drives and keep his floor a little bit more elevated. All right, the last guy we're going to talk about here is Justin Herbert. So we're homers, right? Got the Herbert jersey right here.
Yeah.
Love that we get to talk about Herbert in this group. I would rank him last of this group, but seeing him finally kind of take the reins of the offense has been great, right? He had 350 yards. He didn't throw for a touchdown against Arizona in week 7, but 15 points on passing yards alone, and then 25 and 20 over the last 2 weeks. Over 275 passing yards and multiple scores in both of those games. I think he is trending up in a major way here, right? He was getting drafted really low in the pre-draft process, didn't deliver before the bye week, but now we're starting to see signs of life here from him throwing the ball. Quentin Johnston was back, and we saw him catch a deep touchdown. Ladd McConkey has obviously started to come on in his rookie season as we've gotten further into it. And we've also seen Dobbins lose efficiency on the ground. So I think, the offense has to lean on him a little bit more. Unfortunately, he goes up against Tennessee this week. They're a very good pass defense. They obviously have Snead there to kind of cover up the number one option. So I think less explosive plays in this one. But again, somebody that I think just is earning more trust from the fantasy community. In Superflex, you should be getting him in your lineup. There might have been some question marks in the past, but I think you should definitely be playing him at this point. And he's providing a floor that didn't exist earlier in the year.
Yeah, I think that's important what you said about J.K. Dobbins, right? Like in the beginning of the year, he was running with so much efficiency. They were just running every single play. And as that's tailored off, like in weeks 6 through 9, they're actually 4th in the NFL in neutral pass rate. So we're seeing like a coaching staff adapt and shift, which I think is great. And in that span, Herbert's averaged over 300 yards per game. You mentioned the connection with Ladd McConkey is like awesome. We love Ladd. Even Quentin Johnston caught a ball over his shoulder, which was like really impressive. And one of the plays I really liked with Quentin Johnston was they got him in space in the short area over the middle. Like that is what he excelled at TCU. And I understand in the Big 12, like people are spread out miles wide and like he can kind of use his size and speed. But that's what we were saying in the offseason. Like if he is going to develop, they need to learn how to use him. And it seems like having an adult coaching staff in the room has really helped. And again, with Herbert, not to pile on the love, but he's only thrown 1 pick this season. I don't know if you heard he's responded to someone saying, should Herbert argue with the refs more? He's like, no, he's not that type of guy. He's much better than that. And he's just always gushing over Herbert. And I was bummed to rank him 3rd in this little mini tier, but you're right with Tennessee, like they are easier to run against than pass against. And I think that the Titans probably will struggle to put up points against the Chargers defense.
They will.
So yeah. And Mason Rudolph has kind of looked better than maybe we want to admit, but I think overall, like we talked about that last week with Jameis Winston being a sit, even though he was coming in so hot, just with how good this Chargers defense is. So I think they'll be able to control the ball, but I will say they're going to let him take some play action deep shots once or twice, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, they will. And this tier comes down to matchups, right? Because Tua and Rodgers just have dream matchups, right? But we wanted to highlight Herbert here because if you have him, don't be afraid to start him. And you want to make sure that you have him because I think going into this next stretch of games, from an NFL perspective, it's going to be really hard to win these games for the Chargers, but they get Cincinnati, easy to throw against Baltimore, easy to throw against Atlanta, easy to throw against Kansas City. Pretty good defense, but relatively easy to throw against like Tampa Bay. Herbert could be in for major, major fantasy production over that stretch of games, especially if they're going to be able to win any of those games. So, tough matchup this week, but I really, really like where he's trending for the rest of the year.
I agree.
All right. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching. I forgot to ask you guys to subscribe at the top of the video, but if you're still here, please hit that subscribe button. We're trying to get to 300 subscribers by the end of this week. We are almost there. We only need 2 more. So if you're listening to this and you're not subscribed, please hit that button for us. We would appreciate the support, and we look forward to talking to you tomorrow.
Later.